Go ahead, walk away. My wealthy husband challenged me, saying I wouldn't survive a week without him. I simply dropped my keys on the counter of the house he paid for. The very next day his boss and father were in a frenzy, calling non-stop. And now the bank is ringing off the hook. What exactly did you push her into doing? You wouldn't last a week without me, Mila. Ashton set down his crystal tumbler, the Macallan inside catching the light from our chandelier. Without my money, my connections, my protection, you'd be nobody again. Just another pretty face waiting tables or answering phones. He straightened his Hermes tie, waiting for me to beg, to cry, to promise I'd never leave. Instead, I reached into my Chanel bag and pulled out my keys. House. Range Rover. Safe. I lined them up on our granite counter, each one clicking against the stone. You're right, I said. Let's find out. The color drained from his face as I walked toward the door, leaving everything he'd bought me behind. But that was 3 hours ago. Now I sat in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton watching the security footage on my phone. Yes, I had access to our penthouse cameras, another thing Ashton never knew I understood. He was pacing our kitchen, picking up the keys, setting them down, calling someone. Probably Nathan. Maybe his father. Definitely not the police, because what would he say? My wife left her keys and walked out? The concierge approached with a gentle smile. Miss Hawthorne, your suite is ready. My maiden name felt strange on my tongue when I'd made the reservation this morning, but it was mine, the one thing Ashton couldn't buy or sell or trade. I'd paid with my own money, 6 figures accumulated from what Ashton called my cute little hobby of day trading. He'd laugh at parties telling people I played with stocks like other wives played tennis. Nobody knew I'd turned his initial allowance of $10,000 into enough to live on for years. The suite was smaller than our penthouse but infinitely larger in possibility. I set down my single suitcase, the one I'd hidden at my gym months ago, slowly filling it with essentials every visit. Ashton monitored our credit cards but never questioned gym trips. After all, trophy wives needed to maintain their value. My phone buzzed. 17 missed calls already. I deleted his contact, watched his number become just digits on a screen. The first voicemail played accidentally when I tried to silence it. Mila, this is ridiculous. Come home. We'll talk about whatever upset you. His voice had that controlled quality, like he was handling a volatile investment instead of a wife. By the 5th message the control was cracking. You can't just leave. Half of everything is in both our names. You need my signature too. I deleted them all. The morning felt like a different lifetime. I'd woken at 6 a.m. as always, alone in our California king bed because Ashton had fallen asleep in his study again, surrounded by monitors showing after-hours trading in Tokyo. The coffee maker was already programmed. Despite what he told his friends, I'd learned to use every appliance in that kitchen. He claimed I couldn't operate a toaster at last month's dinner party. Everyone laughed. Even me, the good wife who knew her role. I'd stood at our floor-to-ceiling windows 23 floors up, watching the city wake. The silk robe he'd given me for Christmas itched against my skin. Designer label, wrong size, chosen by his assistant who thought all wives wore size 2. Today was our anniversary. For years. He hadn't mentioned it once this week, but I'd stopped expecting him to remember after year 2. The charity luncheon invitation sat on our marble counter. Another command performance where I'd smile while the wives compared vacation homes. Helen Brennan would ask about my little hobby, with that patronizing smile. Still playing with your phone stocks, dear? She'd say, not knowing I'd made more this quarter than her husband's dental practice. That's when I decided to organize Ashton's study, looking for our insurance documents. He was always particular about his space, everything arranged just so. The voice recorder sat on his desk, that little silver device he used for important thoughts. When I knocked it over reaching for files, it clattered onto the marble floor and started playing. His voice filled the room mid-conversation. She asked to see our investment statements yesterday. Laughter. I told her they were too complicated, lots of numbers. He actually believed me. Nathan, I could get her to sign over her kidneys and she'd just ask what pen to use. My hands had trembled as I picked it up, saw the date. Last Tuesday. The day I'd brought him lunch at his office, surprising him with his favorite sushi. He'd seemed so pleased, introducing me to his new analyst as the beautiful Mrs. Whitmore. Now I understood the smirk on the analyst's face. The recording kept going. That's why this type is perfect, Ashton continued. Pretty enough for photos, dumb enough to control, grateful enough to stay quiet. My father taught me well. Marry beauty, rent intelligence. I'd placed the recorder back exactly where it had fallen, angled precisely how he'd left it. Then I'd found the insurance papers and something else. A folder marked prenuptial amendments. Documents dated last month, adding clauses about abandonment, forfeit of assets if I left without just cause. Already notarized with my signature, forged but expertly so. Standing in that study, surrounded by evidence of his success and my insignificance, something crystallized. He wasn't just dismissive or cruel. He was systematic. I was an investment and he was already planning my depreciation. The Ritz suite had a view of our building. I could see our penthouse from here, lights blazing as Ashton probably tore through his office, looking for signs of what I'd taken. He wouldn't find any. I'd only photographed documents, only copied files to clouds he didn't know existed. The real theft would come later, legally, through the 50% of everything he'd put in my name for tax benefits. My phone rang again. This time Richard Whitmore. Ashton's father, calling personally. I let it ring, remembering how he'd introduced me at his last party. Ashton's wife. Pretty thing, isn't she? Like I was a coat or a watch, something to be appraised and approved. Margaret's text came through then, the secretary who'd served tea at every family gathering. Heard you left. Room 1247 when you're ready to talk. I have 40 years of information you need. I smiled, the first real smile in months. Ashton said I wouldn't last a week without him. But he'd never asked what I was doing all those hours he left me alone. Never wondered why his secretary knew my maiden name. Never imagined his trophy might have been taking notes. 7 days. That's all I needed to prove him wrong. After that, I'd take the rest of my life proving myself right. The keys I'd left weren't surrender. They were a declaration of war. And unlike Ashton, I'd already read all the terms and conditions. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Ritz. I'd established a routine. Morning trades from my suite, afternoon walks through Central Park, evenings reviewing the documents Margaret had been feeding me in careful doses. Each file she shared revealed another layer of the Whitmore Empire's corruption. But today was different. Today was May 15th, our actual anniversary date, and despite everything I'd agreed to one dinner. Just to discuss the logistics, Ashton had said on the phone, his voice carefully neutral. We need to be civilized about this. The salon on Fifth Avenue was the same one I'd used throughout our marriage. Celeste, my hairdresser, worked her fingers through my hair with practiced precision. Special occasion? She asked, not recognizing the bitter irony in her question. Anniversary dinner, I said, watching my reflection transform into what Ashton preferred. Sleek, controlled, expensive looking. 4 years, right? How wonderful. Where's he taking you? Le Bernardin. His favorite, where the waiters knew his wine preferences and the chef sent complimentary courses to his regular table. I'd made the reservation myself, knowing he'd forget otherwise. The confirmation email sat in my phone, right next to the 17 legal documents my lawyer had prepared for tonight's real purpose. The dress had cost $8,000, more than most people's monthly salaries, charged to the credit card he hadn't frozen yet. Dark blue, his favorite color on me, though he hadn't commented on my appearance in 6 months. I studied myself in the boutique mirror. Every inch the perfect wife he'd curated, except for the flash drive hidden in my clutch containing 40 gigabytes of evidence. My phone buzzed as I was leaving the salon. Slight change, Ashton's text read. Nathan and Diana joining us. Need to discuss Singapore deal. Same time. Of course. Our anniversary had become a business meeting. I sat in the back of the cab watching Manhattan blur past and typed back, perfect. He wouldn't catch the edge in that single word, wouldn't notice it was the first time I hadn't added a heart emoji or love you to my response. 20 minutes later, another text. Actually, father insists we come to the estate. He's having something catered. 8 p.m. The driver had already turned toward Midtown. Change of plans, I told him, giving Richard's address in Westchester. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was wearing a dress worth a small fortune to eat dinner at the house of a man who'd never bothered to learn my last name before it became Whitmore. Richard's estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured perfection. The circular drive was full of cars I recognized. Nathan's Bentley, 2 other hedge fund partners' vehicles, even Graham Chen's new Tesla. This wasn't a change of plans. This was an ambush disguised as dinner. Patricia answered the door, Richard's third wife, younger than me at 28. Her smile held the kind of exhausted recognition I'd seen in mirrors lately. "Mila, you look stunning," she said, though her eyes said something else entirely. "Why did you come?" The foyer opened into the main sitting room where Ashton held court, tumbler in hand, his third by the color in his cheeks. He glanced at me, taking in the dress, the hair, the effort, and turned back to his conversation without acknowledgement. Nathan waved. Diana sat apart, nursing a martini with the dedication of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "The lovely Mila," Richard boomed, appearing from his study. He kissed my cheek, reeking of cigars and bourbon. "Though I hear you're being not so lovely lately. This separation nonsense. Bad for business, you understand." Margaret appeared with a tray of champagne. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, enough for me to see she knew exactly what this was. As she handed me a glass, her fingers brushed mine. "Some anniversaries," she whispered, barely audible, "are about endings, not beginnings." The dining room had been set for 12. I recognized most faces. Business partners, their wives, even Ashton's lawyer, though that realization came later. They'd orchestrated this entire evening to pressure me back into line. I sat in my designated seat between Nathan and Graham's wife, facing a portrait of Richard's father, the original Whitmore who'd built this empire on insider trading and strategic marriages. Dinner arrived in courses. Somewhere between the soup and fish, Ashton started his performance. "Funny story about how Mila and I met," he announced, though no one had asked. The room turned toward him with practiced attention. "She was at the Milken conference, completely lost. Wandered into a derivatives panel thinking it was about art derivatives." He paused for laughter that came too readily. "She asked if hedge funds were about landscaping investments. Literally thought we were discussing garden hedges." The story was fiction. I'd been at that conference presenting my graduate thesis on market manipulation in emerging economies. But that truth didn't fit his narrative of rescuing a beautiful fool. "Thank God for lost puppies," Nathan added, raising his glass. "They make the best pets." Diana's hand found mine under the table, a gesture meant to comfort. But her pity felt worse than the insults. I squeezed back once, then excused myself. "Powder room," I murmured, though everyone knew women didn't powder anything anymore. Richard's study door stood partially open. His computer screen glowed, forgotten in his rush to play host. I slipped inside, memorizing everything. The desk layout, the wall safe behind a terrible reproduction of Monet's water lilies, the filing cabinet marked private. His password was written on a post-it note stuck to his monitor. Richard 3 number 1936. His birth year and his favorite Shakespeare character. These men thought they were so clever. Through the window I could see the dinner table, everyone laughing at something. Ashton was standing now, gesturing with his wine glass, playing the role of successful husband to perfection while his actual wife stood in shadows, gathering intelligence. When I returned, the conversation had shifted to business. Singapore expansion, leverage ratios, risk assessments. The wives sat silent, ornamental, while the men discussed millions like monopoly money. Then Nathan, drunk enough to be cruel, made his pronouncement. "You know what Ashton is? He's an empire builder. And Mila here, she's the trophy case. Beautiful, elegant, but ultimately just for display." The laughter that followed had an edge, like they all knew the joke cut deeper than intended. Ashton raised his glass. "Best investment I ever made. Great tax benefits, minimal maintenance, and she appreciates in value at all the right social events." Margaret was clearing plates, her movements deliberately slow. Our eyes met across the room, and in her gaze, I saw 40 years of accumulated rage, 40 years of watching women like me be diminished, discarded, replaced. Her slight nod told me everything. She'd heard it all, recorded it all, was ready when I was. Something inside me shifted. Not broke, but crystallized, hard and clear as the diamond on my finger that suddenly felt like a shackle I was ready to pick. The diamond on my finger caught the light as I walked out of Richard's estate that night, each facet throwing rainbows that felt like tiny promises of revenge. In the car, I pulled out a cheap flip phone from beneath the passenger seat, purchased with cash at a bodega where they didn't ask questions. My fingers typed out a simple message to the only number saved. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Jade Garden, Chinatown. Margaret's reply came within minutes. I'll bring tea. 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years. I maintained my routine at the Ritz, ordered room service, made small trades to keep my mind sharp. Ashton had stopped calling. His lawyer was handling everything now, sending formal letters about reconciliation in the interest of financial stability. Each letter went straight to my shredder, then to Patricia Kim, my new attorney, who lived 2 hours away in Connecticut where Ashton's connections meant nothing. Tuesday arrived gray and humid. The Jade Garden sat squeezed between a funeral home and a shop selling knockoff handbags, its windows fogged with decades of steam from dumpling baskets. No one from Ashton's world would ever find themselves here, which made it perfect. Margaret was already seated in the back corner, wearing a cardigan despite the heat, looking like someone's grandmother who'd gotten lost on her way to church. But her eyes, those eyes held 40 years of carefully documented fury. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, and I cut her off. "Hawthorne. I'm using my maiden name now." She smiled, pushing a tin of butter cookies across the table. The tin looked ancient, flowers painted on top, the kind your aunt might use for sewing supplies. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a lipstick tube. "Twist the bottom 3 times, then pull," she instructed. The lipstick was actually a flash drive. 16 gigabytes of what Margaret called insurance. "Started collecting in 1982, she said, voice barely above the restaurant's din. "Richard's first wife, Elena, she knew something was wrong with the books. Asked me to watch, to listen. Then she had her accident." Margaret's fingers made air quotes around the last word. "Single car, perfect weather, failed brakes. After that I kept everything. Every memo, every call transcript I could access, every mistress paid off with company funds, every SEC filing that didn't match internal documents." The waiter brought tea and we fell silent until he left. Margaret poured with steady hands, though I noticed the slight tremor when she mentioned Elena. The second wife, Caroline, she lasted longer. Smart woman, MBA from Wharton. Started asking the right questions in year 4. Richard had her committed for exhaustion. She signed the divorce papers from a psychiatric facility, gave up all claims to avoid indefinite treatment. My tea went cold as Margaret outlined 2 decades of financial crimes, each one meticulously documented on that tiny drive. But she saved the worst for last. "Your husband isn't just complicit. He's been grooming Nathan's wife, Diana. There's a paper trail, flowers charged to shell companies, hotel reservations that align with his supposed client meetings. He's planning to leave you, Mila, but first he needs to destroy your credibility. That anniversary dinner? They were all witnesses to your unstable behavior. Walking out, leaving your keys, they'll paint it as a breakdown. The dumpling basket arrived, but neither of us touched it. I was thinking about Diana's hand squeezing mine at dinner, wondering if her sympathy was real or part of another game. That night, I sat in my hotel room with my laptop, the flash drive loaded, scrolling through Margaret's evidence. It was overwhelming, 40 years compressed into folders labeled by year, by crime, by victim. But I needed more. I needed Ashton's own records to corroborate everything. Patricia Kim answered my call on the second ring, despite it being nearly midnight. "I need to create a company," I told her. "Something that sounds like nothing, that could be anything." "When?" "Tomorrow. That's a rush job. It'll cost. I'll pay triple." 2 hours north on I-95, past the exits for Greenwich and Stamford where Ashton's colleagues lived in their own marble prisons. Patricia's office occupied the second floor of a building that also housed a dentist and a tax preparer. No marble, no modern art, just diplomas on the wall and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. She'd already drawn up the papers. Phantom Rose Holdings LC. Incorporated in Delaware, registered in Connecticut with a business address that led to a P.O. box that led to another LLC that led nowhere. "The structure is completely legal," she explained, sliding documents across her desk. "But complex enough that tracing it would take months of dedicated forensic accounting. By then you'll have accomplished whatever you're planning." "How do you know I'm planning something?" Patricia leaned back, studying me. "Because women who pay triple for Rush Incorporation don't do it for fun. They do it for survival." A week later, Ashton left for Singapore. 5 days of meetings about expansion into Asian markets, he'd said, though I knew from Margaret's intelligence that he was really setting up accounts I'd never be able to touch. The housekeeper, Maria, seemed relieved when I told her to take the week off, paid vacation. "Spring cleaning," I explained. I need to do this myself. Alone in our penthouse, I became someone else. Not the trophy wife, not the ornament, but a forensic archaeologist excavating evidence of my own destruction. Ashton's office password was embarrassingly sentimental. Our wedding date, as if that meant something to him beyond a tax advantage. His computer open like a confession booth. Folders within folders, trades time-stamped to the minute, showing clear patterns. Richard would have lunch with certain executives. Within hours, Ashton would make trades in those companies. The pattern was so obvious once you knew to look for it. In his locked drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about, lay correspondence that made my stomach turn. Not just about Diana but about me. Emails to Nathan discussing my mental fragility, suggestions that I might need professional intervention, plans to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist Richard knew, one who'd testified in Caroline's commitment. My hands stayed steady as I photographed each page, uploaded each file to Phantom Rose Holdings' encrypted cloud storage. Every document went back exactly where I'd found it, aligned to the millimeter. Ashton would return to an office that looked untouched, while I held copies of everything that could destroy him. The final document was in his personal safe. He'd hidden the combination in a book about Warren Buffett, thinking he was clever. Inside, beyond the cash and gold coins, was a single folder marked Exit Strategy. Not for trades or business. For me. A timeline showing when to file for divorce, how to claim abandonment, which assets to hide first. My elimination was scheduled like a merger, complete with profit projections. I photographed it all, then sat in his leather chair looking at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably filing her own reports. Patricia was setting up the next phase of corporate structures. And Ashton was sleeping soundly in Singapore, dreaming of empires built on the bones of women who'd trusted him. He was wrong about one thing, though. I wasn't just another trophy in his case. I was the one holding the hammer. The hammer in my hand suddenly felt heavier than Ashton's entire mahogany desk. I set down the metaphorical weapon and stood from his chair, my reflection caught in the dark computer screen. A woman I barely recognized, someone harder and more calculating than the girl who'd walked down the aisle 4 years ago. The next morning, I returned to my routine at the Equinox on Park Avenue. The pool was my sanctuary, 50 laps where the world dissolved into chlorine and rhythm. I was pulling myself out of the water when Diana appeared, her Lululemon workout set pristine but her face haggard, dark circles poorly concealed under concealer. "Nathan knows," she said without preamble, glancing around the empty pool deck. "About Ashton's messages to me. He hired a private investigator, had our phones cloned. Water dripped from my hair onto the marble tiles. Why are you telling me this? Because whatever you're planning, and don't insult me by pretending you're not, these men don't just get angry when cornered. They get even." She pulled her oversized sunglasses down, revealing a bruise along her jawline, carefully covered but visible this close. "Nathan's already moving assets offshore. Richard's been making calls to judges he golf with. They know something's coming." Before I could respond, she was gone, her heels clicking across the wet floor with purpose. I sat there, chlorine burning my nose, wondering if she'd been sent to test me or warn me. With these people, kindness and cruelty often wore the same mask. That evening, Ashton came home carrying calla lilies, my least favorite flowers, though I'd mentioned it only once 3 years ago. He'd brought roses for every occasion since, when he remembered occasions at all. The lilies meant something. They meant he was paying attention now. "Thought we could have dinner together," he said, setting them on the counter where my keys once lay. "Like we used to. We hadn't eaten together without others present in 6 months." I watched him pour wine, the good Bordeaux he usually saved for clients, and arrange cheese on a plate with unusual care. His hands, normally so steady when signing million-dollar trades, showed the slightest tremor. "I've been thinking," he said, settling across from me at our dining table that seats 12 but had never hosted a family meal. "We should take a vacation. Just us. Maybe that place in Montana with no cell service? Remember how you loved the mountains?" I'd mentioned loving mountains once on our honeymoon, while he'd spent the entire trip on conference calls. The fact he remembered felt like a trap spring-loaded with teeth. "When?" I asked, cutting a piece of manchego with surgical precision. "Next week. Or sooner. Tomorrow even." His eagerness betrayed him. "You seem stressed, Mila." The separation, living in hotels, it's not good for you. He pushed a document across the table. New insurance papers, he explained, better coverage for both of us. His eyes tracked my hand as I picked up the pen, watching for hesitation, for signs of suspicion. Under the table, my phone captured every page, Patricia Kim's app running silently, storing images in Phantom Rose's encrypted cloud. You trust me, don't you? His question hung between us like a chandelier about to fall. Completely, I lied, signing my name with the same hand that had documented his plans to destroy me. 3 days later, my mother arrived from Ohio, her presence announced by Ashton himself, picking her up from JFK, something he'd never done before. He carried her luggage, complimented her new haircut, asked about her garden with feigned interest so polished it gleamed. Oh honey, she gasped, pulling me aside in the kitchen while Ashton mixed her a gin and tonic with the precise ratio she preferred. You didn't tell me things had gotten better. He seems so devoted. The words I wanted to say piled up behind my teeth. He's performing, Mom. This is a show where you're the audience and I'm the prop, and somewhere there's a finale that ends with me institutionalized or dead. Dad, I smiled. He's full of surprises. That week became a masterclass in Ashton's abilities. Broadway shows he'd previously called waste of time, dinners at restaurants he'd booked months in advance. Though I knew his assistant had pulled strings that morning, a surprise spa day for both of us while he handled some business. Mom glowed under the attention, tears actually forming when he toasted her at dinner, calling her the woman who raised such an incredible daughter. I watched from across the table as he performed the role of perfect son-in-law, and realized with cold clarity that I'd never actually seen Ashton try before. This was him at full power, the charm that had built his empire, directed now at convincing my mother that her daughter was safe. The final night of her visit, she sat on my bed in the guest room holding my hands. Honey, you've lost weight. And your smile, it's different. Practiced. Her fingers found my cheekbones, sharper now from months of barely eating. Are you happy? Behind her, through the doorway, I could see Ashton's shadow in the hallway, listening. I'm exactly where I planned to be, I said, loud enough for him to hear, ambiguous enough to be true. After Mom left, Margaret texted about meeting somewhere new. The New York Public Library's reading room, where she volunteered teaching literacy to immigrants. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was teaching people to read while surrounded by the city's most powerful illiterates, men who never read the human cost of their contracts. She spread newspaper clippings across the worn wooden table like tarot cards revealing my future. Elena Whitmore, 1994, drove her Mercedes off a bridge, perfect weather, no skid marks. Caroline Whitmore, 2003, institutionalized for exhaustion, divorced while sedated, vanished after signing papers. Jennifer Whitmore, 2015, accused of embezzlement she didn't commit, bankruptcy, last known address a shelter in Detroit. Now look at these. Margaret placed 4 photographs in a row. Elena, Caroline, Jennifer, and me. All blonde, all between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches. All with the same delicate bone structure that photographed well at charity events. Richard picks them, she said quietly, mindful of the students around us. Like casting calls. Young, beautiful, from middle-class families impressed by wealth. Just smart enough to be interesting, not smart enough to be dangerous. Marry them to Ashton, use them for appearances, then dispose of them in year 4 when they start asking questions. Why year 4? Long enough to establish patterns of instability. Short enough that no real bonds form with the social circle. By year 5 you're either gone or broken. She touched my hand, her skin paper thin but her grip strong. You're at 4 years, 3 months. Whatever you're planning, Mila, do it now. Elena waited too long. Caroline fought too openly. Jennifer trusted the wrong people. I stared at the women who'd worn my name before me, their faces blurring into a single warning. What happened to you? I asked Margaret. Why did you stay? She was quiet for a moment, organizing the clippings with librarian precision. I was Richard's first secretary's daughter. When she died, he offered me the job out of kindness. I was 19, grateful, stupid. By the time I understood what I was documenting, I was trapped too. Different kind of trap, but still a cage. Now I'm 62, invisible and very, very patient. The students around us packed up their books, the library announcing closing time. As we stood to leave, Margaret handed me one last photo. A young woman, beautiful, blonde, probably 22. Who's this? Madison Hayes. Richard had lunch with her father last week. She just graduated from Penn. Engagement announcement expected within 6 months. Margaret's eyes held 4 decades of rage compressed into laser focus. She's the next you unless we stop them now. Madison Hayes's photo burned in my pocket as I left the library. 22 years old, whole life ahead of her, about to walk into the same trap that had caught 4 women before her. I tucked the picture into my wallet behind my old student ID, the one from before I became Mrs. Whitmore when I still had my own name and my own dreams. The next morning I initiated the first withdrawal. $8,000 from our joint checking. Enough to look like furniture shopping, not enough to trigger Ashton's attention. The bank teller didn't even blink. Mrs. Whitmore buying expensive things was as routine as morning coffee. I converted it to cash at 3 different banks, then deposited it into Phantom Rose Holdings account in Connecticut. Patricia Kim had shown me how to create a paper trail that looked like interior design consulting fees. The IRS loves documentation, she'd said. Even if it's fiction, as long as it's properly filed fiction. That evening, Ashton came home at 9 instead of his usual 7. His tie was loosened, jacket off, scotch already on his breath from whatever bar he'd stopped at between the office and home. I was in the kitchen making myself tea when he stumbled slightly at the doorway. Lost the Morrison account today, he announced, pouring himself 3 fingers of Macallan, though it looked closer to 4. 40 million in assets gone. They said there were concerns about compliance. Can you believe that? Compliance concerns at my firm. I kept my face neutral, though I knew Margaret had sent anonymous tips to Morrison's compliance officer 2 weeks ago. That's unfortunate, I said, watching him drain half the glass in one swallow. Nathan thinks someone's talking to our clients. He poured again, his hand less steady. Says there are rumors about an SEC investigation. Ridiculous. The next day I moved 12,000. The day after 15. Spa treatments, I told the one teller who asked. My husband wanted me to pamper myself. She smiled knowingly, probably thinking of her own husband who never noticed such expenses. Ashton's drinking escalated in perfect proportion to his losses. Every night brought a new crisis. Another client pulling funds, another partner asking questions, another rumor about federal involvement. He'd stand in his study, calls on speaker while he paced and drank, signing whatever I brought him without reading. Power of attorney adjustments, insurance modifications, trust amendments. His signature got sloppier with each passing day. Patricia called Thursday morning from a number I didn't recognize. Can you meet today? Urgent. I found her at a rest stop on I-95, sitting in her sensible Honda, looking like any other suburban lawyer except for the tension in her shoulders. The FBI contacted me, she said without preamble. They know I represent you. They want to talk. My chest tightened. How did they? Richard Whitmore has been under investigation for 18 months. A former employee named Dennis Chin filed a whistleblower complaint. They've been building a case, but they need someone with inside access to corroborate. She handed me a business card. Agent Sarah Coleman. She specifically asked for you. Did you tell them anything? Attorney-client privilege. But Mila, if you're going to move, it has to be now. Once the FBI goes public with their investigation, all assets will be frozen. Everything you haven't moved will be locked in litigation for years. That night I watched Ashton pour his 6th drink before dinner. His phone rang constantly. Nathan, Richard, lawyers, crisis managers. Each call made him drink more, sign more, suspect everyone except the wife quietly refilling his glass. Maybe you should eat something, I suggested, playing concerned spouse while calculating how much longer his liver could take this pace. Not hungry, he muttered, then looked at me with bloodshot eyes. You've been different lately. Calmer. Therapy, I lied smoothly. Learning to accept what I can't change. Saturday arrived with the monthly ladies' auxiliary meeting at Riverside Country Club. I'd been dreading it, knowing Helen Brennan would be there with her coterie of wives who'd made sport of diminishing me for 4 years. But Patricia's news had lit something inside me, a timer counting down to when I could stop pretending. Helen started before I'd even sat down. Mila, darling, still playing with your little investment apps? So cute when wives have hobbies. Like children with toy kitchens. The room tittered with practiced laughter. Margaret stood in the corner, pouring tea, invisible as wallpaper. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Actually, Helen, I said, my voice carrying across the room, my portfolio is up 340% this year. How's yours doing? Silence fell like a guillotine. Helen's face went from patronizing to shocked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. I'm sorry, what? She managed. 340%. Would you like to see the statements? I particularly enjoyed shorting your husband's pharmaceutical company last month. Made a killing when their patent got rejected. You did know about the patent rejection, right? Helen's face went white. She hadn't known. Around the room, other wives leaned forward, suddenly seeing me as something other than Ashton's pretty accessory. Though I suppose, I continued, stirring sugar into my tea with deliberate calm, some of us prefer real kitchens to toy ones. And some of us prefer real portfolios to playing pretend. Margaret actually smiled. Not much, just a slight upturn of her lips as she refilled my cup. The meeting continued in strained silence, the usual gossip replaced by careful glances in my direction. By evening, Ashton would hear about this. By morning, Richard would know his daughter-in-law had claws. But I didn't care anymore. The timer was running down and I was tired of being underestimated. The explosion came Wednesday. I was in my hotel room when my phone lit up with notifications. Diana had filed for divorce from Nathan and she'd brought receipts. Not just infidelity, 3 mistresses over 2 years, but financial fraud, hidden accounts, and a particularly damning email trail where Nathan discussed removing Diana from the equation with his lawyer. Ashton called me 17 times in an hour. I answered on the 18th. What did you tell her? He demanded without preamble. Tell who? Diana. Nathan thinks I leaked information to her. He says you two were friendly at dinners that you must have. I told her nothing, I said truthfully. Diana had found her own evidence, fought her own war. We were parallel soldiers who'd never compared notes. Through the phone I could hear something crash in his office. He's pulling out of the fund. 20 years of partnership, gone. He says I betrayed him for a woman. His laugh was bitter, broken. Wasn't even interested in Diana. He's too old, too smart. I was just keeping options open. The admission should have hurt, but I felt nothing. Just made a note in my phone, evidence Patricia might need later. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else, I heard Nathan screaming in the background. Well, congratulations, you've destroyed us both. The line went dead. Ashton didn't call back. But Margaret texted an hour later. Richard called emergency meeting. All partners. The empire is cracking. I stared at Margaret's text for a full minute, the words, the empire is cracking, glowing on my screen like a prophecy finally coming true. My hands moved without conscious thought, pulling a red wig from my closet, purchased with cash 3 weeks ago from a costume shop in Queens where they didn't ask questions. The dress was polyester, off the rack from Target, something Mila Whitmore would never wear. Dark sunglasses completed the transformation into nobody, anyone, someone who didn't exist in the Whitmore's world. Nathan's office building on Madison Avenue had the kind of security that looked impressive but was mostly theater. I'd been there dozens of times as Ashton's wife, knew the guards rotated lunch breaks at 12:30, knew Nathan's assistant Sarah always took 45 minutes to grab sushi from the place 3 blocks over. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. In my purse, a manila envelope held printed screenshots of every message Ashton had sent about Nathan. The mockery, the contempt, the detailed plans to steal his clients once the partnership dissolved. But the real poison was at the bottom. Ashton's financial projections for acquiring Diana after her divorce, complete with calculations about her inherited wealth and how to access it through marriage. Nathan's office door was solid mahogany with his name in gold letters. I slipped the envelope underneath, heard it whisper across his Persian rug, then walked back to the elevator without rushing. The security camera would show a woman who could be anyone, walking with purpose but not urgency. 3 hours later, Margaret forwarded me an email from Ashton's assistant. Partnership dissolution letter received from Nathan Chin. Effective immediately. Legal team requesting emergency meeting. The Warwick Hotel on 54th Street still accepted cash if you had enough of it. I registered under Mila Hawthorne, my maiden name feeling like armor I'd finally remembered how to wear. The room was small but clean, with a desk where I set up my laptop and the burner phone Patricia had given me. The SEC whistleblower hotline answered after 12 rings. First, an automated system, press 1 for this, 2 for that, like reporting financial crimes was as simple as ordering pizza. Finally, a human voice. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division. I need to report systematic insider trading at Whitmore Capital Management, I said, my voice steady as marble. I have 5 years of documented evidence, including time-stamped trades that correspond with material non-public information. The agent, she said her name was Jennifer Liu, stayed quiet while I laid out everything. Richard's lunches with executives followed by Ashton's perfectly timed trades. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern so clear a child could follow it. She asked technical questions that revealed she understood exactly what I was describing. Why are you coming forward now, Mrs. Whitmore? I looked out the window at Manhattan's skyline, all those towers built by men like Richard and Ashton. Because I finally understand that staying silent makes me complicit. And because they're planning to do to another woman what they did to me. After the call, I took Margaret's 40 years of evidence, copied onto 3 separate drives, and placed one in a safety deposit box at Chase, one at Bank of America, and one in Patricia's office safe. The instructions were simple. If anything happened to me, release everything to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times simultaneously. That evening, Richard's black Mercedes pulled into our building's garage. I watched from the penthouse window as he emerged, his face tight with something between fury and fear. He didn't bother with the doorman, had his own key, the privilege of a father-in-law who owned 30% of his son's fund. Where are your books? Richard's voice carried through the penthouse before he'd even reached Ashton's study. Dad, what's the books, Ashton? Now. I made myself small in the kitchen, preparing coffee with deliberate normalcy while their voices rose and fell through the walls. My phone, recording everything, rested against a vase on the hallway table, picking up every word. Nathan's out, Ashton was saying. But we can manage without. Nathan's out, Morrison's out, Chen pulled everything this morning. The FBI was at Chen's office, Ashton. Asking questions about our trading patterns. That's impossible. Everything we do was bulletproof. Until someone started talking. Richard's voice dropped dangerously. You promised me the wives were handled. Said Mila was too stupid to understand what she was signing. She is, Ashton insisted. She doesn't even know how to read a financial statement. I entered with the coffee tray, my face perfectly blank, the devoted wife serving drinks while her world discussed her like furniture. They both looked at me, Richard with cold assessment, Ashton with dismissive certainty. Cream. I asked Richard. He ignored me, turning back to his son. Find the leak. Fix it. Or we're all finished. They worked until 2 a.m., spreading papers across Ashton's study like tarot cards that might reveal their future. I heard Ashton's printer running constantly, documents being shredded, calls to lawyers who charged $2,000 an hour to answer phones at midnight. By 3 a.m., Ashton had passed out in his chair, surrounded by evidence of his crumbling empire. His head rested on a stack of contracts, drool pooling on papers worth millions. The mighty financial genius, reduced to an exhausted man who'd built his throne on the bones of women he'd underestimated. I moved through our penthouse one last time, not with nostalgia but with the clinical efficiency of someone already gone. My clothes stayed in the closet. Let him explain to people why his wife left everything behind. The jewelry remained in its boxes, blood diamonds and gilt gold that had never truly been mine. In my purse. My laptop, my real identification, and the banking information for Phantom Rose Holdings, which now held exactly 50% of our liquid assets, legally withdrawn over the past weeks. The keys went on the granite counter where this had all started. House key, car key, safe key, lined up with military precision. Next to them, a single note on my personal stationery, the expensive kind he'd bought to make me look the part. Check your accounts. The doorman didn't question why Mrs. Whitmore was leaving at 3 a.m. with only her purse. In their world, the rich did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. He'd probably seen stranger things. The October air hit my face as I stepped onto the street, cold and sharp and absolutely perfect. Behind me, 23 floors up, Ashton slept in his chair, unaware that his wife had just fired the first shot in a war he didn't know had already begun. In 6 hours he'd wake to find his accounts halved, his partners gone, and the FBI closing in. The Uber driver asked where to, and for the first time in 4 years I gave an address that was entirely my own. The Uber dropped me at the Warwick Hotel just as the sun began painting Manhattan's glass towers gold. I paid cash, walked through the lobby without looking back, and took the elevator to my room on the 12th floor. From my window I had a perfect view of our building. Ashton's building now, I supposed. At 6:47 a.m. I ordered room service. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The normalcy of it felt surreal. At 6:52 I opened my laptop and watched our joint accounts online, knowing the banks would notify Ashton the moment they opened at 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock exactly I refreshed the page. The accounts showed the automatic divisions Patricia had filed weeks ago, triggered by my official change of residence. $17 million, redistributed according to New York state matrimonial law. Half of everything, just as the prenup he'd insisted on had specified. The same prenup he thought protected him but actually guaranteed my rights to marital assets. My phone, placed face up on the white tablecloth, lit up at 7:03. Ashton's photo appeared, the one from our wedding where he looked invincible. I let it ring through to voicemail. By 7:15 he'd called 9 times. I turned on the voice recorder, playing each message aloud to the empty room. First message: Mila, what's happening? The bank just called. There's some kind of error with our accounts. Fourth message: this isn't funny. Call me back. We need to fix this before the markets open. 11th message: what did you do? What did you do? 19th message: please. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, we can work this out. You don't understand the position you're putting me in. 28th message: the margin calls are hitting. I can't cover them without those funds. You're destroying everything we built. 35th message: Mila, please. They're freezing everything. The FBI is here. God, please answer. By noon, his voice had devolved from commanding to begging. The 47th call came through as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. This time I recognized the number. His lawyer, not him. Mrs. Whitmore, this is James Kellerman. Your husband has retained me to discuss the irregular movement of marital assets. We need to. I hung up and blocked the number. Then I called Patricia. They're panicking, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Everything we did was completely legal. Those assets were jointly owned, you had full withdrawal rights, and we followed the letter of the law. He can contest it, but it'll take months, and by then he'll have bigger problems. That evening I was eating dinner in my room. A perfect piece of salmon I could actually taste now that my appetite had returned, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. I turned on the television, flipping to CNN. The footage was beautiful in its brutality. Richard Whitmore, the man who'd built an empire on other people's losses, being led from his Westchester mansion in handcuffs. His silver hair was disheveled, his usual armor of expensive suits replaced with a wrinkled shirt. FBI agents carried boxes of evidence past the cameras, each one containing Margaret's 40 years of patient documentation. Federal authorities arrested hedge fund mogul Richard Whitmore this morning, the reporter announced, following a years-long investigation into insider trading, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Sources indicate multiple whistleblowers provided crucial evidence, including detailed records spanning 4 decades. My phone lit up with a text from Margaret, just a champagne bottle emoji. Margaret, who'd never sent an emoji in her life, who'd served these men coffee while documenting their crimes, had finally seen justice arrive at Richard Whitmore's door. 3 weeks passed in strange peace. I met with FBI agents, provided testimony, watched the news coverage from my hotel room as the empire crumbled in real time. Nathan fled to Switzerland. Graham Chin pled guilty immediately, hoping for leniency. Other partners turned state's evidence, racing to sell each other out for reduced sentences. Then on a Thursday evening Ashton found me. I was sitting at the Ritz-Carlton bar, drinking champagne I'd bought with my own money earned from trades I'd made while he thought I was playing with cute apps. He looked like a ghost wearing an expensive suit. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, his Tom Ford jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. You destroyed everything, he said without preamble, standing too close, whiskey on his breath at 6 p.m. I turned on my bar stool, met his bloodshot eyes directly. Oh. I revealed everything. There's a difference. We had a life. You had a life. I had a role in your performance. I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles settle before continuing. You said I wouldn't survive a week without you. It's been 21 days and you're the one who looks like he's drowning. He reached for my wrist, his fingers closing on air as I pulled away. You don't understand what you've done. My father's facing 20 years. The fund is gone. Everything is. Everything is exactly what you built it to be. A house of cards. I just stopped holding my breath. His face contorted, anger replacing desperation. He raised his voice, drawing stares from other patrons. You stupid. Sir. The bartender, a woman about Margaret's age, stepped forward. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Do you know who I am? Ashton demanded. Someone who's disturbing our guests, she replied calmly. Security arrived within minutes. 2 men who guided Ashton out with professional efficiency while he shouted about lawyers and lawsuits. The bartender returned to her station, polished a glass and set another champagne flute in front of me. On the house, she said. That was long overdue. 2 days later, Diana and I were called to testify on the same day, though we'd never coordinated. She looked stronger than I'd ever seen her, no longer the wilting flower at dinner parties. We sat in the courthouse hallway, not speaking but understanding everything. Margaret's testimony came last and lasted 3 days. She brought receipts for everything. Every bribe, every threat, every woman they'd destroyed. She spoke about Elena's accident, Caroline's institutionalization, Jennifer's manufactured bankruptcy. She presented 4 decades of evidence with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. Why did you keep all of this? The prosecutor asked. Margaret adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Richard where he sat at the defendant's table. Because I knew that someday someone would be brave enough to use it. Someone like Mrs. Hawthorne. The prosecutor looked confused. You mean Mrs. Whitmore? No, Margaret said firmly. I mean Miss Hawthorne. She took back her name. She took back everything. That night Patricia called with news. The prosecutor says Margaret's evidence alone guarantees convictions. Richard will never see freedom again. Ashton's looking at 15 to 20. I stood at my hotel window looking out at the city lights, all those towers that would keep standing long after the Whitmore empire had turned to dust. The towers looked smaller from Patricia's office window, or maybe I was just seeing them differently now. She slid the final divorce decree across her desk, a document that weighed nothing but changed everything. The judge's ruling came through this morning, she said, unable to hide her satisfaction. The house, 60% of remaining liquid assets, plus your separate property remains untouched. The courtroom had been packed 3 days earlier. Ashton sat beside his lawyer, wearing the same suit he'd worn to our wedding, though it hung loose on his frame now. Stress had carved away his golden boy polish, leaving someone I barely recognized. His lawyer, Kellerman, had tried one last desperate play. Mrs. Whitmore benefited from these alleged crimes. She lived in luxury, enjoyed the proceeds. Patricia stood smoothly, pulling out her laptop. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording from Mr. Whitmore's personal voice recorder, dated 14 months ago. Ashton's voice filled the courtroom, clear and contemptuous. She wouldn't understand a financial statement if I drew her pictures. That's the beauty of marrying someone decorative. She's too stupid to ask complicated questions. Judge Catherine Chin, a woman who'd probably heard every variation of this story, looked directly at Ashton. Mr. Whitmore, it appears you were quite wrong about your wife's intelligence. Perhaps if you'd been less convinced of her stupidity, you might have been more careful with your crimes. Now holding the decree I signed my name, Mila Hawthorne, on every line Patricia indicated. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. The whistleblower reward should clear next week, Patricia added. Between yours and Margaret's, you'll have more than enough for your plans. Margaret was waiting in the lobby wearing a new suit, the first time I'd seen her in anything but servant's clothes. We walked 2 blocks to the building where Ashton's fund used to operate. The directory in the lobby still had a blank space where Whitmore Capital Management had been listed. 3rd floor, Margaret said, pressing the elevator button. The landlord gave us a deal. Apparently having a foundation for abuse survivors is better PR than having empty offices. The space was modest, 4 rooms that had once been a dental practice. But the windows faced east, catching morning light, and there was something poetic about building our future above Ashton's ruins. Phoenix Foundation, Margaret read from the temporary sign we'd hung that morning. Rising from ashes. Our first client arrived that afternoon. Jennifer Chin, wife of a pharmaceutical executive who'd been doctoring clinical trial data. She clutched a folder of documents like a life preserver. "My husband says I'm paranoid," she whispered, looking between Margaret and me. "Says I wouldn't understand the science anyway." Margaret leaned forward, her 40 years of experience compressed into absolute certainty. "Every document tells a story, Mrs. Chin. We're going to help you write a new ending." 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called. "I'm coming to visit," she announced, not asking. "I need to see my daughter." I'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, smaller than the penthouse by far, but full of windows and light. The kitchen was cramped but functional, and I'd been teaching myself to actually cook, not just heat things up. Mom arrived with 1 suitcase and 1,000 questions she was too polite to ask. I met her at JFK myself, driving my own used Honda. Reliable, practical, invisible in traffic. "You look different," she said, studying my face as we sat in airport traffic. "Younger somehow. Lighter." That week we didn't talk about Ashton or the trial or the money sitting in accounts I could access but rarely touched. We talked about the foundation, about Margaret's dry humor, about the women who came to us carrying secrets like stones. I cooked Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey that was slightly dry, stuffing that was perfect, cranberry sauce from a can because some traditions deserve to survive. Mom watched me move around my kitchen, comfortable in my space in a way I'd never been in the penthouse. "You're happy," she said, not a question but a revelation. "I'm free," I corrected, then reconsidered. Which might be the same thing. She stayed an extra week, sleeping in the guest room I'd painted sage green, reading books while I worked on foundation cases. On her last night, she hugged me the way she used to when I was small, before I learned to perform happiness instead of feel it. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not for surviving him but for becoming yourself." 6 months had passed since I'd walked out of the penthouse. Spring was arriving in Brooklyn, and I stood in the doorway of the house. My house now, though I'd only returned to sign the final papers. The rooms echoed with absence, Ashton's things long since removed by movers his mother hired. My phone rang. Margaret, her voice energized in a way that 40 years of silence never allowed. "We have a new client," she said. "Senator Williams's wife. She's been documenting campaign finance violations for 2 years." I looked at the keys in my hand, the ones I'd taken back, the ones I'd left, the ones I'd earned. They were heavier now, weighted with purpose instead of revenge. Through the window, I could see Madison Hayes walking past with her new fiancé. Not Ashton, who was serving 3 to 5 in minimum security, or any Whitmore man, but someone her own age who held her hand like it mattered. "Ready for round 2? Margaret asked. I thought about the 17 women who'd come through our doors in just 3 months. 4 had successfully left their marriages with their assets intact. 13 were still gathering courage and documentation. Each one learning what I'd learned, that freedom isn't granted, it's taken one document at a time. I was born ready, I told Margaret, closing the door on the empty house. I just didn't know it until someone tried to convince me I was nothing. The lock clicked with finality. I walked to my Honda, tossing the keys to the estate agent who'd sell this monument to Ashton's ego. The proceeds would fund the Phoenix Foundation for another year, maybe 2. As I drove back to Brooklyn, back to my smaller, warmer life, I thought about Elena, Caroline, Jennifer, the ghosts of wives past who'd walked this path before me. They'd been broken or silenced or erased. But their stories, preserved in Margaret's careful documentation, had saved me. Now Margaret and I were saving others, one signature at a time, one woman at a time, building a bridge out of the ashes of the empire we'd burned down. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Coffee tomorrow? I have someone you should meet. She needs our help." I smiled, merging into traffic, heading home. My real home, not a cage with a doorman and a marble counter where I'd finally set down my keys and walked toward this moment, this life, this freedom that looked exactly like I'd always imagined it would. Unremarkable, undramatic, and absolutely mine. If this story of calculated revenge had you cheering for Mila, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she lined up those keys on the granite counter and walked away without looking back. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. I was given 5 minutes to clear my desk before my husband's father, the CEO, dismissed me in front of the entire leadership team. Instead of breaking, I smiled and said, "Thank you." One by one, 22 colleagues quietly stood and followed me out. Nia sneered until the legal director turned pale and whispered, "Get the lawyer, now." 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, Nicholas announced to the room, his Rolex glinting as he tapped its face. I continued packing my desk drawer, pulling out 6 years' worth of work. Project files, team photos, the backup drive containing every system architecture I'd built for Vertex Solutions. The 12 executives watched in silence as I placed each item deliberately into my cardboard box. Nia Blackwood leaned back in her chair, examining her manicured nails with practiced boredom. She thought she'd won. For minutes, Nicholas called out again, his voice sharp with authority. That's when Logan Mitchell stood up from his desk outside the conference room's glass walls, laptop bag already in hand. But I should explain how we got here. How 3 weeks of calculated betrayal led to this moment where my father-in-law counted down my professional execution like a microwave timer. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that dedication and hard work should be valued over office politics, please consider subscribing. It helps more people discover these important stories. Now let's see what Nicholas had planned. It started at Sunday dinner at the Harrington estate, where we gathered like actors in a play nobody wanted to perform anymore. I'd arrived with Taylor and my homemade apple pie, the one with the lattice crust that took 2 hours to perfect. Eleanor always requested it but never mentioned who made it, as if pies materialized from thin air or perhaps the help. Another record quarter for Vertex Solutions, Nicholas had proclaimed, standing at the head of the mahogany dining table that could seat 20 but usually held just the 4 of us, drowning in its own excess. He raised his crystal tumbler, the whiskey inside catching the light from Eleanor's precious Viennese chandelier. We're dominating the market because I know how to recognize talent and put it where it belongs. His hand landed on Taylor's shoulder with the weight of expectation and inheritance. My husband glowed under the attention, though his contribution to the company consisted mainly of having the right last name and showing up to meetings he didn't understand. Nobody mentioned the Henderson account I'd saved 2 nights before, or the Morrison Industries contract I'd salvaged by working through 3 consecutive weekends, or the fact that while Nicholas was at his monthly country club whiskey tasting, detecting notes of oak and self-importance, I was rebuilding our entire server infrastructure after a critical failure. "You look tired, dear," Eleanor had murmured, her fingers, decorated with enough diamonds to fund my entire department's salary, briefly grazing my shoulder. "Perhaps you should consider better work-life balance. Appearance matters, especially for women in leadership." I'd swallowed my response along with my overcooked salmon. The truth was I looked tired because I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, but admitting that would only prove their unspoken point, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I was, as Nia would later write, overwhelmed. The morning routine with Taylor had become a study in marital disconnect. Each day started the same. Him fumbling with the expensive espresso machine his parents gifted us, creating coffee that tasted like burnt disappointment while scrolling through sports news on his phone. "Big week ahead?" he'd asked that particular Tuesday, 2 weeks before everything imploded. "I should hear about the promotion today." I watched his reflection tense in the microwave door. "Right. The promotion." He took a sip of his failed latte. "Dad mentioned Nia's been really impressive lately. She's been staying late, taking on extra projects." My fingers stilled on my laptop keyboard. Nia Blackwood, who arrived at 9:30 sharp and left at 5 o'clock on the dot. Nia, whom I'd been training for 3 months at Nicholas's specific request. "She just needs mentoring," he'd said. "Someone to show her how we do things here." So I'd opened my playbook, shared my strategies, explained our client relationships with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. She'd taken notes in her designer portfolio, asking questions that felt increasingly invasive. "How do you handle system failures? What's your backup protocol? Who has administrative access?" I thought she was eager. Turned out she was building a case. The server migration crisis should have been my moment of vindication. 7 days before Nicholas would slam his palm on that conference table, our entire data infrastructure needed emergency migration. 40 terabytes, 8-hour window, Zero margin for error. Everything went wrong at once. Corrupted files, failed backups, a power surge that shouldn't have been possible. By 10 p.m. I'd activated my emergency protocol, calling in my entire team. Logan arrived first, still wearing the program from his daughter Emma's dance recital pinned to his shirt. She understood, he'd said quietly, though I caught him checking videos his wife sent from the auditorium. Priya came next, apology heavy in her voice as she called her husband. I know it's our anniversary dinner. I'll make it up to you. She'd ended the call and dove into code like she was defusing a nuclear weapon. Marcus Thompson, Sarah Kim, the Morrison twins who communicated in what seemed like telepathic programming language, they all came without question. The conference room became our bunker, littered with laptops, energy drinks, and eventually Chinese takeout that went cold before we could eat it. We're like some weird, dysfunctional family, Marcus had joked at 2 a.m., attempting to eat lo mein with one hand while typing with the other. Yeah, but at least we chose each other, Sarah had replied, and something about those words felt prophetic now. We'd saved everything. Every file, every client, every contract. Nicholas would never know we'd been 3 keystrokes from losing millions in data and trust. That's what I did. I solved catastrophes so quietly that nobody knew they'd happened. Then came the email. The misdirected message that revealed everything. I'd been reviewing the Henderson account files at 11:47 p.m., preparing my promotion presentation when it appeared. From Nia Blackwood. To me. Except it wasn't meant for me. Nicholas, as discussed, I've successfully salvaged the Henderson situation. The client was thoroughly impressed with my crisis management. I believe it's time to discuss restructuring. She seems overwhelmed, arrives looking exhausted most mornings. Perhaps fresh leadership would benefit the department. My laptop screen blurred as I read it twice, then 3 times. The Henderson situation. The one I'd personally managed while Nia was posting Instagram stories from a wine tasting. The rescue I'd orchestrated while she slept. I forwarded it to my personal email without thinking, some primitive instinct for self-preservation kicking in. Then I sat in my home office, still wearing the coffee-stained blouse I'd put on 18 hours earlier, understanding finally that dedication looked like weakness to those who'd never truly worked. 3 minutes, Nicholas announced now, his voice cutting through my memory. The executives remained frozen, but through the glass I saw Priya standing up, then Marcus, then Sarah. One by one my team, my chosen family, began to rise. 2 minutes, Nicholas called out, but his voice seemed to come from underwater. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see the entire 15th floor frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Sarah Kim had her phone halfway to her ear. The Morrison twins stood at their adjoining desks, identical expressions of shock on their faces. I reached for the framed photo from our last team celebration, the one where we'd worked 72 hours straight to launch the Patterson project. My fingers brushed against something else. A USB drive, taped underneath my desk drawer. The one where I'd backed up every email, every document, every piece of evidence that might matter someday. Apparently someday was today. The morning had started wrong from the moment I'd badged into the building at 6:45 a.m. The security guard, usually chatty, had avoided my eyes. The elevator seemed too quiet. The 15th floor felt like it was holding its breath. When I'd reached the conference room to set up my presentation, the one about our department's 340% efficiency increase, Nia was already there. In my seat. The one I'd claimed 3 years ago because it faced away from the glaring morning sun. Her laptop was open to spreadsheets I recognized immediately. My department's confidential budget projections, the ones on a secured server she shouldn't have been able to access. Oh, good morning, she'd said, that saccharine sweetness coating her words like artificial sweetener. Nicholas asked me to review these before the meeting. You don't mind, do you? The question wasn't really a question. We both knew it. I'd stood there, laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, watching her scroll through salary allocations, project budgets, vendor contracts. 6 years of carefully built financial architecture. How did you get access to those files? She'd looked up then, and for just a second the mask slipped. Pure satisfaction flickered across her features before the innocent expression returned. Nicholas gave me temporary admin privileges. To help with the transition. Transition. The word hung there between us like a diagnosis. The room had filled gradually but wrong. David Park from finance arrived first, clutching his tablet like a shield, not meeting my eyes when I said good morning. Then came Margaret Lawson, our legal director, who normally radiated composure but today kept checking her phone, gripping her legal pad with white knuckles. Even the coffee was wrong. Usually, someone would have started the expensive machine by now, the one that ground beans fresh for each cup. Today there was only silence and the smell of fierce sweat barely masked by expensive cologne. I'd started my presentation anyway. Clicked through slides showing our achievements, our metrics, our wins. My voice stayed steady even as I felt the room's energy shifting, darkening, preparing for something I couldn't quite name. As you can see, we've exceeded every target by. The door hadn't just opened. It had exploded inward, the handle cracking against the wall hard enough to leave a mark. Nicholas stood there, his face that particular shade of red that appeared when his blood pressure medication wasn't quite enough. His Italian suit, usually perfect, looked disheveled. His tie was crooked. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his palm hitting the table with enough force to make everyone's coffee jump. Margaret's actually spilled, brown liquid pooling across her legal pad, but she didn't move to clean it. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk." The words didn't make sense at first. They existed in the air but my brain refused to process them. I stood there, presentation clicker still in my hand, slide 17 still glowing on the screen behind me. A graph showing the money I'd saved this company. That's when I understood the choreography of this morning. Why Nia had my files. Why executives avoided eye contact. Why Margaret looked ready to cry or run or both. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Orchestrated. I had been marked for execution and everyone except me had known it was coming. Nia leaned back in my chair, and I saw it then. The slight upturn of her lips, the relaxation in her shoulders, the way she examined her manicure with the satisfaction of someone admiring their own handiwork. She'd won something and we both knew it. But here's what 20 years in tech had taught me. The moment when you think you've won is usually when you're most vulnerable. David Park's fingers were moving across his calculator with the frantic energy of someone watching money evaporate. I knew that motion. I'd seen it during budget crises, contract negotiations, anytime numbers were about to become very, very bad. Margaret had her phone out now, typing with shaking fingers, her face the gray-white of old paper. They understood something Nicholas and Nia didn't. Something about contracts and clauses and the very expensive difference between firing someone privately versus publicly humiliating them in front of witnesses. I set down the presentation clicker with deliberate calm. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. She'd survived the depression, raised 6 kids alone after my grandfather died, never let anyone see her buckle. "When they expect you to break," she told me once, peeling potatoes with hands that never trembled, "that's when you stand straightest." Thank you. The words came out clear, genuine even. Because in that moment I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. 6 years of pretending Taylor's family accepted me. 6 years of Eleanor's backhanded compliments about my appearance while I saved her husband's company. 6 years of being good enough to fix every crisis but never good enough to truly belong. Nicholas's jaw went slack. He'd expected tears, pleading, anger, anything but gratitude. Behind him I saw several executives exchange glances. Someone's pen rolled off the table and hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. I began packing with the methodical precision I used for system architectures. Each item lifted, examined, placed in the cardboard box that had materialized from somewhere. The backup drive went in first. Then the project files. The team photo. My coffee mug with the chip on the handle. 1 minute. Nicholas announced, but his voice had lost its edge. Confusion was creeping in, the first crack in his certainty. Through the glass motion caught my eye. Logan Mitchell was standing at his desk, laptop bag already over his shoulder. He wasn't packing. He was already packed. Ready. Then Priya stood. Then Marcus. One by one, like a slow wave building strength, my entire team rose from their desks. Nicholas turned to see what I was looking at and his face went from red to white so fast I thought he might faint. Nia's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to something approaching panic. "Time's up," Nicholas said, but it came out as a question. I picked up my box, its weight familiar and strange at once. 6 years reduced to what I could carry in my arms. As I walked toward the door, 2 security guards appeared. Standard protocol for terminations, they mumbled apologetically. Tom and Derek. I'd brought them coffee during late-night lockdowns, knew their kids' names. "I'm sorry about this," Tom whispered. Don't be, I told him. You're just doing your job. We walked through the cubicle farm toward the elevator, and that's when the symphony began. The squeak of chairs pushing back from desks. The rustle of bags being gathered. The soft thuds of laptops closing. Logan fell into step beside me. Then Priya, her heels clicking a determined rhythm. Marcus, Sarah, the Morrison twins moving in perfect synchronization. By the time we reached the elevator, 22 people had joined our procession. Tom stopped walking. His hand dropped from my elbow. In 15 years, he said, voice thick with something between awe and respect, I've never seen anything like this. Neither had Nicholas Harrington, whose empire had just started its collapse, though he wouldn't understand that for another 48 hours. The elevator doors closed on 22 people and one security guard who looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle or a massacre. He wasn't sure which. Tom pressed the lobby button with a hand that shook slightly. Nobody spoke during the descent. The only sound was the mechanical hum and someone's phone buzzing insistently. Then Logan's. Then Priya's. Like popcorn starting to pop, our phones erupted in a cascade of notifications. When the doors opened to the lobby, we walked out into blazing midday sun. The kind of light that makes everything look overexposed and surreal. Maria at reception stood up so fast her chair rolled backward into the wall. Gerald, the maintenance supervisor, stopped mopping and watched us file past. Someone started a slow clap from the loading dock. I couldn't see who, and then others joined in until the sound echoed off the parking garage walls. This is insane, Priya whispered beside me. This is justice, Logan corrected, shifting his laptop bag. We stood there in the parking lot, 23 people blinking in the harsh light, phones buzzing like angry wasps. The Morrison twins were already on their laptops, sitting on the concrete median, typing furiously. Sarah had her phone pressed to her ear, explaining to someone, probably her partner, why she was suddenly unemployed at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. I should go, I said to no one in particular. My car keys felt foreign in my hand. We all should, Marcus replied, but nobody moved. We stood there like survivors of a shipwreck, not quite ready to leave the sight of the vessel going down. The drive home took 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way, unable to focus on anything else. My phone, tossed in the passenger seat, continued its electronic seizure. 3 times I reached for it at red lights. 3 times I pulled my hand back. Taylor's car was in the driveway. Of course. He worked from home Tuesdays and Thursdays, a luxury Nicholas had granted his son but would never have considered for anyone else, especially not me despite my longer tenure and higher position. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The house we'd bought 3 years ago, with help from his parents for the down payment, naturally, looked the same as when I'd left this morning. Same cherry tree in the front yard. Same crack in the driveway we kept meaning to fix. Same life except everything had changed. Taylor met me at the door, his laptop still in one hand, confusion written across his face. Behind him I could see his home office setup, dual monitors glowing with spreadsheets he probably didn't understand. Why are you home? Are you sick? Then he noticed the box in my arms. His face went through a series of expressions like someone cycling through TV channels. Confusion, concern, realization, anger. Dad called. His voice was flat. He says you lost it in the meeting. Says you were unstable, started crying, had to be escorted out by security. I set the box on our entryway table, the one his mother had given us that I'd always thought was too ornate for the space. Is that what he said? He said you've been struggling lately. That Nia had to cover for your mistakes. That he had no choice. I pulled out my phone, ignored the 100 other notifications and found the forwarded email. Nia's email. The one claiming credit for the Henderson account. The one calling me overwhelmed. The one that was clearly part of a longer conversation with Nicholas the first hadn't been privy to. Taylor read it once. Then again. His jaw muscle twitched. The tell he'd inherited from his father that appeared when reality didn't match the narrative he'd been fed. This is. He started then stopped. When did she send this? 3 weeks ago. Accidentally sent to me instead of your father. And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have said Nia made an honest mistake, that your father would never plot against his own daughter-in-law? The silence stretched between us like a contested border. Taylor set down his laptop, ran both hands through his hair. Another inherited gesture. I need to think, he said, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. I just need to think. Taylor. But he was already gone, the door closing with a decisive click that sounded like punctuation. I stood in our entryway, still in my work clothes, surrounded by the life we'd built on a foundation that was apparently sand. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, exhaustion, morbid curiosity, made me swipe accept. Please don't hang up. Margaret Lawson's voice, barely above a whisper. I'm calling from the bathroom. The executive bathroom on 16, the one nobody uses. Margaret. Your contract. The clause about hostile termination. Nicholas never read it. Legal reviewed it 6 years ago when you were hired, but he just signed where I told him to sign. Her words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam. The humiliation multiplier alone puts your severance at $800,000. But with documented harassment, the public nature of it, 22 witnesses, we're looking at millions. Millions. Why are you telling me this? Pause. The sound of running water. Because in about an hour, Nicholas is going to realize what he's done. And when he does, he's going to blame me. Say I should have warned him. I've worked here 12 years. I've covered for his temper, his affairs, his questionable decisions. But this is going to end my career. Margaret. Can we meet? Tomorrow. Somewhere nobody from Vertex would go. I have documentation. Things you should know. Things that might help us both. The call ended before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, when it immediately buzzed again. Dylan from my former team, had sent a screenshot. A Slack channel called The Exodus, with 247 members before IT shut it down. The messages were a flood of disbelief, support, and panic. Did this really happen? 22 people walked out? What do we do now? Is the Henderson project dead? Who's going to maintain the servers? My LinkedIn app showed 47 notifications. Emails poured in. 3 competitors had already reached out with variations of heard the news and let's talk. But one email made me stop breathing. Catherine Walsh, the venture capitalist who'd turned down Nicholas's pitch 6 months ago, telling him his company lacked innovative leadership. Her message was 2 sentences. Your team's loyalty is worth more than Vertex's entire market cap. Let's build something. I was reading it for the 3rd time when the doorbell rang. Eleanor Harrington stood on my porch at 9 p.m., makeup smudged, holding a manila folder like it might bite her. May I come in? Eleanor asked, and for the first time in 6 years she looked fragile. Not the polished society matron who commanded charity boards and country club committees, but a woman carrying weight she could no longer bear alone. I stepped aside. She entered my home, the home she'd helped fund but never truly welcomed me into, and stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching that manila folder like a confession. Taylor's not here, I said. I know. I waited until I saw him leave. She followed me to the living room, sitting on the edge of our couch as if she might need to flee at any moment. Nicholas fired his own brother this way 20 years ago. Edward. He was CFO, had been with the company since the beginning. She opened the folder, revealing yellowed board meeting minutes, old emails printed on paper that had softened with age. Edward questioned one of Nicholas's decisions publicly. Not even criticized, just questioned. Nicholas gave him 10 minutes to clear out. The family never recovered. Edward's wife left him. His kids won't speak to Nicholas. 20 years and the wound still bleeds at every holiday. Why are you telling me this now? Eleanor's laugh was bitter, nothing like her usual musical society trill. Because I've watched my husband destroy people for decades, telling myself it was business, that successful men had to be ruthless. But watching him do it to you, someone who saved his company while he was playing golf, someone who made my son happy even if we never showed it, I can't pretend anymore. She pulled out another paper. This is from 5 years ago. Michelle Reeves, VP of Marketing. Fired in a board meeting for insubordination. She'd suggested Nicholas's strategy was outdated. Another paper. 3 years ago, James Chin, head of innovation. Terminated publicly because he'd received a job offer from a competitor and Nicholas wanted to make an example. They choose the easy path, Eleanor continued, and now she was looking directly at me. Nicholas and Taylor both. They avoid conflict by creating bigger conflicts. They'd rather destroy relationships than admit fault. I've enabled it for 35 years and I'm sorry. Her hug was unexpected, fierce and brief. She left the folder on my coffee table and disappeared into the night, leaving me with evidence of a pattern I'd been too close to see. My phone rang at 2:07 a.m. I'd finally fallen asleep on the couch, still in my work clothes, the folder's contents spread across the coffee table like a crime scene. Please tell me you're awake. Margaret Lawson's voice was pitched high with hysteria. I am now. Nia destroyed everything. She tried to prove she could handle your systems, wanted to show Nicholas she didn't need the transition period. She was trying to access backup files but deleted the main customer database instead. I sat up, suddenly completely awake. She deleted the entire customer database? That's not the worst part. She tried to recover it herself. Didn't call IT, didn't follow protocol. She ran some recovery software she found online. It corrupted everything. The entire East Coast operation has been dark for 6 hours. They're estimating 14 hours minimum before even partial restoration. The silence stretched while I processed this. Our customer database wasn't just names and addresses. It was 17 years of relationship management, purchase histories, custom configurations, support tickets, the DNA of the company's client relationships. How much? I asked. Conservative estimate? 50 million in immediate losses. That's not counting the clients we'll lose, the lawsuits, the reputation damage. Margaret's voice cracked. She's been in the bathroom crying for 2 hours. Nicholas has been screaming at everyone. He threw a laptop. Actually threw it at the wall. Security is on standby. I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a cold, empty nothing. Nia had engineered my humiliation, and now she was drowning in her own incompetence. Margaret, you need to document everything. Every email, every action, every word Nicholas says. Already am. I'm creating my own insurance policy. She paused. Your team could have prevented this. My team wouldn't have caused it in the first place. After Margaret hung up, I sat in the dark, watching the sunrise creep across my living room walls. Somewhere across town, Vertex Solutions was hemorrhaging money and reputation while Nia learned that taking credit and taking responsibility were vastly different things. Taylor came home at 7 a.m. looking like he'd slept in his car. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair stood at odd angles, and he reeked of whiskey and regret. The database is gone, he said without preamble. I heard. Dad's lost his mind. He's threatening to sue Nia, but legal says he can't because he gave her the access. He's calling emergency board meetings. Mom's had 2 panic attacks. He collapsed on the couch beside me, careful not to touch me. He wants me to convince you to sign an NDA and make this go away quietly. Make what go away? His public humiliation of me? The 22 people who walked out? Or the fact that his chosen replacement just cost the company $50 million? Taylor rubbed his face with both hands. All of it. He's offering the $800,000 Margaret mentioned. Full severance, extended benefits, glowing recommendation. All you have to do is sign saying you won't discuss what happened or compete for 2 years. No. The board is threatening his position. If you sue, if this gets worse, he could lose everything. I turned to look at my husband, really look at him. He was a stranger wearing Taylor's face, speaking Taylor's voice, but the man I'd married, who'd promised to stand by me, to be my partner, was gone if he'd ever existed at all. He should have thought of that before he gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk. I need you to fix this. Those 5 words hung between us like a blade. Not, I'm sorry. Not, he was wrong. Not, I should have defended you. Just another demand to sacrifice my dignity for the Harrington family comfort. I need you to leave, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. Taylor looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something, awareness maybe, that he'd chosen the wrong side. But Harringtons didn't admit mistakes. They just found someone else to blame. He left without another word, and I knew our marriage had ended in that moment, even if the paperwork would come later. By noon, my living room had transformed into a startup incubator. 22 people with laptops balanced on their knees, sitting on floors, perched on chair arms, crowded around my dining table. Logan's 12-year-old daughter Emma sat in the corner doing homework, occasionally looking up at the chaos with curious eyes. Phoenix Digital, Priya announced, holding up a napkin where she'd sketched a logo, a stylized bird rising from flames. We're not subtle, but neither were they. Marcus was on his laptop, fingers flying. Domain secured. Social media handles locked down. I'm also grabbing variations before Vertex thanks to CyberSquat. His husband, James, appeared with a tray of coffee mugs. I made a supply run. Nobody's building a company on empty stomachs. Pizza boxes accumulated like sedimentary layers of ambition. The Morrison twins had somehow created a project management system on my living room wall using sticky notes. Sarah was already reaching out to contacts, her phone voice professional despite sitting cross-legged on my floor. We need incorporation documents, someone said. On it, replied Logan, whose brother-in-law was apparently a corporate attorney. The energy was electric, desperate, hopeful. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were refugees from a corporate disaster, building something new from the ashes of what Nicholas had destroyed. And in that crowded, chaotic living room, I felt more at home than I had in 6 years at Vertex. My phone buzzed at 4:47 p.m., 3 days after we'd transformed my living room into Phoenix Digital's first headquarters. Robert Hoffman's number appeared on the screen, Nicholas's lawyer calling for the third time today. Ms. West, Mr. Harrington has authorized me to increase the offer to $800,000. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man losing a war he'd thought would be easy. This is the baseline severance per your contract. The baseline assumes normal termination procedures, I replied, watching the Morrison twins carry computer equipment into what would become our actual office, a warehouse we'd found yesterday. Being given 5 minutes to clear my desk in front of 12 witnesses isn't normal. Margaret Lawson can verify that. The silence stretched. Ms. Lawson is no longer authorized to speak on behalf of Vertex Solutions. Of course she wasn't. Nicholas's first instinct was always to shoot the messenger, even when the message was a legal disaster of his own making. Then I suppose we'll let the courts decide what's appropriate. My lawyer will be in touch. I ended the call just as a white Tesla pulled into the warehouse parking lot. Catherine Walsh stepped out, her designer heels clicking against cracked asphalt, surveying our new space with the calculating eye of someone who'd turned dozens startups into billion-dollar companies. The warehouse was nothing special. 20,000 square feet of concrete impossibility, still smelling of industrial cleaner and the ghost of whatever had been manufactured here before. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. The loading dock door didn't close properly. There was a suspicious stain on the floor that looked like it had its own ecosystem. This is perfect, Catherine announced, and she wasn't being sarcastic. It's a disaster, Priya countered, gesturing at a ceiling tile that chose that moment to release a small shower of dust. No, it's hungry space. It wants to become something. Catherine walked the perimeter, her footsteps echoing. You know what Amazon's first office was? A garage. Google. A garage. Apple. Also a garage. You've upgraded, you've got walls and everything. She pulled out her phone, made a quick call. Send the contract to my email. Yes, the full amount. She looked at me. 3.5 million seed funding. I want 20% equity and a board seat. Logan nearly dropped his laptop. You haven't even seen our business plan. I've seen 22 people follow their leader out of a stable job into uncertainty. That's worth more than any PowerPoint. He paused at the door. Nicholas Harrington once told me emotional decisions have no place in business. He said it while rejecting my proposal to invest in Vertex because he didn't like my aggressive negotiating style. Funny how his emotional decision to publicly humiliate you just handed me the next unicorn. The next morning she returned with 2 other VCs. They toured our disaster of a warehouse, asked pointed questions about scalability and market penetration, then committed another $2 million on the spot. We hadn't even incorporated yet, and we were valued at $17.5 million. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. But the call that mattered came from Richard Henderson himself, CEO of Henderson Corp. I heard about the situation at Vertex, he said without preamble. I also heard about the database disaster. Nia Blackwood tried to explain to me yesterday why our configurations were lost. She cried. Actually cried on a client call. Mr. Henderson, we've worked with your team for 3 years. You personally saved our product launch. Logan rebuilt our entire architecture over a weekend. Priya identified data patterns that increased our efficiency by 200%. He paused. The contracts follow the talent, not the building. We're moving our business to Phoenix Digital, effective immediately. By end of day, 3 more clients had called. Patterson Industries, Morrison Group, Chin Technologies. Together they represented $30 million in annual contracts. Each one announced their decision on LinkedIn, professional corporate speak that barely disguised their distaste for how Vertex had treated us. Stocks down another 5%, Sarah announced, refreshing her screen. That's 15% total since Tuesday. We were unpacking equipment, setting up desks. Actual desks now, bought secondhand from a startup that had failed, when Taylor appeared in the doorway. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, holding a bouquet of roses. Red roses. After 6 years of marriage, he still didn't know I was allergic to roses, that I preferred wildflowers, that I'd told him this on our 3rd date. Can we talk? He shifted his weight, uncomfortable in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. His father's uniform, adopted without question. I stepped outside with him, leaving my team to continue building our future. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot's cracked asphalt. Dad's willing to apologize, he said, thrusting the roses at me like a peace offering or maybe a shield. He'll give you an executive position. Corner office. 20% raise. Full restoration of benefits. I didn't take the flowers. He thinks this is about office space? It's a good offer. More than fair considering. Considering what? That he humiliated me? That Nia destroyed the database trying to prove she could do my job? That 22 people walked out because they witnessed something unconscionable. Taylor set the roses on the ground between us and they looked sad there, dying on hot asphalt. He's my father. And I was your wife. Past tense, Taylor. You made that past tense the moment you asked me to swallow humiliation for your family's comfort. His face crumpled slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in days. You're giving up on us? On our marriage? Your father didn't break us. You did. When you came home and asked me to fix his mistake instead of standing by me. When you chose the easy path of family loyalty over the hard path of doing what's right. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. The one who'd existed before his father's influence calcified around him like armor. But that man had been buried so long resurrection wasn't possible anymore. I should go, he said quietly. Yes. He walked back to his car, the BMW his father had bought him, naturally, and drove away. The roses remained on the asphalt. I left them there. By evening they'd wilted in the heat, petals scattering in the wind like all of Nicholas's carefully laid plans. At midnight my phone buzzed with an encrypted file from Margaret Lawson. The subject line read simply, "My severance package." The audio file was 43 minutes of a Vertex board meeting. The quality was crystal clear. Margaret had probably recorded it on her phone, placed strategically near the center of the table. $50 million. A voice I recognized as board member Jonathan Cross. He cost us $50 million because he couldn't control his temper? The database is completely corrupted. Another voice, probably CFO David Sterling. Nia Blackwood had no authorization to access those systems. Nicholas gave her full administrative access. This was definitely Margaret, her voice carefully neutral. Against my legal advisement. You promoted your girlfriend's roommate? This voice dripped with disgust. Christina's roommate from college? That's who you thought could replace your daughter-in-law who built half our infrastructure. Nicholas's voice, when it came, sounded hollow. Nia showed promise. She was eager, ambitious. She was unqualified. The slam of a hand on the table. This isn't some family drama, Harrington. You turned a personal vendetta into a $50 million disaster. Maybe more if the clients keep leaving. I listened to the board meeting recording one more time, their voices filling my warehouse office at 1 a.m. This isn't leadership, it's a temper tantrum that cost us $50 million. The disgust in their voices was palpable, even through Margaret's phone speaker. The next morning, everything accelerated. We're doing a press conference, Catherine Walsh announced, striding into our warehouse at 7 a.m. with a media consultant and enough coffee for everyone. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Every tech outlet is begging for a statement. We give them one. I don't want to seem vindictive, I said. You won't. You'll seem like exactly what you are. A leader who refused to accept humiliation as the price of employment. She pulled out her tablet. Meanwhile, Nicholas is holding his own conference at Vertex headquarters at the exact same time. My sources say he's planning to frame this as a strategic restructuring. The thought of Nicholas spinning this disaster into corporate doublespeak should have angered me. Yet I felt oddly calm. Let him try to polish this catastrophe. The truth had a way of showing through no matter how much corporate varnish you applied. We spent the next 24 hours preparing. Logan and Priya helped write my statement. Sarah coordinated logistics. The Morrison twins somehow got us a professional backdrop and lighting that made our warehouse look like a legitimate tech startup instead of abandoned industrial space. At 1:45 p.m. the next day I stood in front of the cameras, wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn that Tuesday, deliberately. My team flanked me, all 22 of them, dressed professionally but not uniformly. We looked like what we were. Individuals who'd chosen to stand together. Good afternoon, I began, my voice steadier than my pulse. 2 weeks ago, Nicholas Harrington gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk after 6 years of building Vertex Solutions' technical infrastructure. Those 5 minutes taught me something valuable. That competence threatens the incompetent, that loyalty means nothing to those who never earned it, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen is being forced to leave a place that never valued you. The cameras clicked like digital rain. Someone from TechCrunch was typing furiously. The Bloomberg reporter was live streaming. Phoenix Digital isn't just a company. It's proof that culture beats strategy, that teams built on respect outperform hierarchies built on fear. We've secured $5.5 million in funding. We've retained clients worth $30 million annually. We've done in 2 weeks what Vertex Solutions claimed would take years, because we have something they lost: trust. Meanwhile, across town, my phone was lighting up with texts from people watching Nicholas's simultaneous conference. Margaret sent a play-by-play. He's sweating through his makeup. Nia's behind him looking at her phone, literally job hunting during the press conference. He just said, strategic restructuring for enhanced agility, and a reporter laughed out loud. Someone shared a screenshot from the financial networks. They were showing both conferences on split screen. Me calm and surrounded by my team. Nicholas, red-faced and stammering, with Nia beside him scrolling through LinkedIn, apparently having given up any pretense of paying attention. The stock ticker ran beneath both feeds. Vertex Solutions, down another 8%. We were still celebrating that evening when my phone rang from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe accept. Please don't hang up. Nia's voice, but different. Gone was the sugar-sweet coating, the practiced professionalism. She sounded young, desperate, frightened. I know you hate me. I don't hate you, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I nothing you. A sharp intake of breath. Then, I've been terminated. Strategic differences, they called it, but everyone knows it means I destroyed the database. I'm being blacklisted. Nobody will even interview me. She was crying now, ugly sobs that reminded me she was only 26, ambitious and ruthless but still young enough to believe those were the only qualities that mattered. I have student loans, rent, my mom's medical bills. She has MS and I'm her only support, and her voice cracked completely. I know I took credit for your work. I know what I did. But please, just one recommendation. Just something that says I'm not completely incompetent. I looked around our warehouse at my team still working despite the late hour, at the whiteboards covered with actual innovation instead of corporate buzzwords, at the space we'd built on merit instead of manipulation. Nia, I said, and she fell silent except for sniffles. You took credit for the Henderson account. You called me overwhelmed and suggested I needed to be replaced. You smiled while Nicholas gave me 5 minutes to pack 6 years of work. I know You took credit for others' work. Now you need to take credit for your own failure. That's the only recommendation I can give you. The call lasted exactly 5 minutes. I timed it. 3 days later, the news broke everywhere at once. Nicholas Harrington steps down as CEO of Vertex Solutions. The press release was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism. Pursuing new opportunities. Time for fresh leadership. Grateful for his years of service. But everyone knew the truth. The board had given him a choice: resign with a fraction of his dignity intact or be fired for cause and lose everything. He'd chosen resignation, but it was like choosing which cliff to jump from. The ending was the same. Eleanor called me that evening, her voice hollow but somehow lighter. He's moving to the guest house. 35 years of marriage, and this is what finally broke us. Not his affairs with secretaries. Not his ego that needed its own zip code. But watching him destroy you, someone who'd done nothing but make him successful, purely for sport. That's when I knew the man I married was gone, if he ever existed. Eleanor. Don't apologize. Don't comfort me. This is freedom, even if it comes 30 years too late. The warehouse felt different that night. The Morrison twins had strung up lights that made the concrete walls look almost warm. Sarah had brought in plants that somehow thrived despite the industrial setting. Marcus had set up a sound system that played quiet jazz while we worked. We did it, Priya said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, not the cheap stuff anymore. Catherine had sent cases of the real thing. Did what? We won. David beat Goliath. The Empire struck back, but the rebels won anyway. Choose your metaphor. Gerald, the maintenance supervisor from Vertex who joined us the week before, raised his mop in the air like a torch. The same gesture from that Tuesday, but different now. Then it had been solidarity. Now it was victory. To second chances and first-class revenge, he called out, and everyone raised their glasses. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about the contract we'd just landed, the one Vertex had been courting for 2 years. Global Tech, whose CEO had called personally to say, "We saw the press conferences. We saw how Vertex treats the people who built their success. We choose to work with builders, not destroyers." Our valuation had hit $50 million. Not bad for a company that started in my living room with pizza boxes and panic. It's not revenge, I told Priya, watching my team, my family of choice, working late because they wanted to, not because someone was counting their hours. It's just success. The revenge is just a side effect. But somewhere across town, Nicholas Harrington sat alone in a guest house behind the mansion he could no longer afford, his empire reduced to rubble in less than a month, learning too late that when you give someone 5 minutes to pack their life, sometimes they take everything with them when they go. The champagne had gone flat by morning, but nobody cared. We were still riding the high of our $50 million valuation when Margaret Lawson walked through our warehouse door at 7:23 a.m., carrying a banker's box and wearing an expression I'd never seen on her face before, determination mixed with something darker. "I need 5 minutes of your time," she said, and the irony of that specific number wasn't lost on anyone. She set the box on my desk. A real desk now, bought from a liquidation sale, scarred but solid. I've been Vertex's legal director for 12 years. I've watched Nicholas destroy careers, break employment laws, cover up harassment claims. I documented everything. She opened the box, revealing folders meticulously labeled by date and violation type. Every illegal termination. Every settlement we paid to keep people quiet. Every time he screamed at someone until they cried, then had me write up paperwork saying they resigned for personal reasons. Logan looked up from his laptop. "Why keep all this?" "Insurance," Margaret said simply. I knew eventually he'd turn on me too. I was right. He's been telling the board I should have prevented your mass exodus, that I failed in my fiduciary duty. He pulled out a thick folder. This one's my favorite. 3 years of emails where he explicitly told me to ignore legal protocols. She turned to me then, her gray eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "I want to be your chief legal officer. In exchange, I'll ensure Nicholas never works in tech again. My revenge might be colder than yours, but it's been fermenting for 12 years. I know where every body is buried because I helped dig the graves." Priya whistled low. "That's dark." "That's business," Margaret corrected. "He taught me that. Now I'm going to teach him what happens when you create enemies who know your secrets." I looked at this woman who'd sat in that boardroom, watching my humiliation, and realized she hadn't been complicit. She'd been collecting evidence. "Welcome to Phoenix Digital," I said. Margaret's first official act was scheduling the settlement negotiation. "Neutral territory," she insisted. "The Marriott downtown. Conference room 12. It costs $800 an hour, which Nicholas will be paying for." The meeting was set for Thursday at 10 a.m. I arrived early, finding the room exactly as expensive and soulless as expected. Leather chairs that tried too hard, a table polished to mirror brightness, windows overlooking a city Nicholas once thought he owned. He arrived 15 minutes late, a power play that might have worked when he had power to play with. But the man who walked in wasn't the Nicholas Harrington who'd slammed his palm on a boardroom table. This version looked deflated, his Armani suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight from stress. His lawyer, Robert Hoffman, looked equally exhausted. "Let's make this quick," Robert said, pulling out documents. "Mr. Harrington is prepared to offer $1.2 million, full benefits continuation for 24 months, and immediate vesting of all stock options." Margaret leaned forward. "Plus a written statement acknowledging that the termination was handled inappropriately, and a non-disparagement clause that goes both ways." Nicholas's jaw clenched, that familiar tell, but he nodded. The man who never apologized, never admitted fault, was about to sign a document acknowledging his failure. The room was silent except for the scratch of pens on paper. Nicholas signed with a hand that trembled slightly, his signature smaller than the bold scrawl I remembered. When he passed the document to me, our eyes met. No words were exchanged, but entire conversations happened in that silence. His eyes said, "You destroyed me." Mine replied, "You destroyed yourself." His said, "I gave you everything." Mine answered, "You gave me 5 minutes." As I endorsed the check, $1.2 million, more money than my parents had seen in their lifetime, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or vindication. Just emptiness. The hollow feeling of winning a war that should never have been fought. Nicholas stood to leave, then paused at the door. For a moment I thought he might speak, might finally say something real. But Harrington men didn't apologize. They just retreated to lick their wounds in private. After he left, Margaret pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my breath catch. Security footage from Vertex, dated the day before Nicholas's resignation. "Tom from security sent this to me," she said. "He thought you should see it." The grainy footage showed Nicholas standing in what had been my office, now completely empty. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. He was alone, speaking to the empty room, though the security camera didn't capture audio. "He stood there for 20 minutes, Margaret said. Tom could read his lips for part of it. He kept saying, 'I gave her 5 minutes. She took everything.'" "He's wrong," I said quietly. "He took everything from himself. I just refused to go down with his ship." Margaret nodded. "Tom wanted you to know something else. He's the one who made sure the cameras captured everything that Tuesday. Every angle of the boardroom, the walkout, all of it. He said watching you maintain dignity while Nicholas lost his mind was the best thing he'd witnessed in 15 years of security work." My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Can you meet? Important." I found her at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place that served $12 lattes to people who thought price equaled quality. She looked different, younger somehow, though she'd aged years in the past month. "I filed for divorce this morning," she said without preamble. "Served him papers at the country club. During the monthly board meeting. Maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation. Eleanor. Don't pity me. This is 35 years overdue." She stirred her overpriced coffee with deliberate calm. "I excused his cruelty as strength. His affairs as stress relief. His destruction of people's careers as business necessities. But watching him destroy you, someone who'd done nothing but succeed, purely because he could, that was when I understood I'd been enabling a monster." She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of legal documents. "I'm taking half of everything. The houses, the investments, his precious wine collection that he spent more time with than his family. My lawyer says the prenup won't hold, too many documented infidelities." "What about Taylor?" Eleanor's face darkened. "Taylor chose his side. He could have stood by you. Instead, he asked you to absorb humiliation to keep his father comfortable. He's exactly what I raised him to be, a coward who mistakes compliance for loyalty." She stood to leave, then paused. "The Harrington dynasty took 3 generations to build. Nicholas destroyed it in 5 minutes. The very 5 minutes he gave you. There's poetry in that, don't you think?" As she walked away, I realized the Harrington empire hadn't just crumbled, it had imploded entirely. Nicholas lost his company, his reputation, his marriage, his legacy. All because he couldn't resist humiliating someone who'd done nothing but make him successful. The settlement check cleared the next day. $1.2 million sitting in my account, feeling simultaneously like justice and blood money. I stared at the $1.2 million in my account on my banking app, the numbers still feeling surreal. 6 months ago this would have been a fantasy. Now it was just a line item in a much larger story. Seed money for something that had already grown beyond my wildest expectations. The warehouse barely resembled the disaster we'd moved into half a year ago. The flickering fluorescence had been replaced with warm LED panels that Logan insisted were better for productivity and mental health. The suspicious stain was gone, covered by industrial epoxy flooring that Priya picked because it matched our logo colors. We had real furniture now, standing desks, ergonomic chairs, even a kitchen that didn't smell like decades of neglect. Mom, look. Emma, Logan's daughter, called from what we designated as the homework corner. She held up her math test, 98%. Priya helped me with the formulas last week. This had become our rhythm. Emma did homework here after school while Logan worked. The Morrison twins taught her coding basics. Sarah helped with her science projects. We weren't just a company. We'd become the family some of us never had, the support system corporate culture promised but never delivered. $75 million valuation as of this morning, Marcus announced, updating our celebration board. Yes, we had one of those now, covered in wins both big and small. And Richardson Industries just signed. That's 40 employees and 12 major clients. 40 employees. People who'd chosen us not for the stability, we were still a startup after all, but for the culture. They'd seen our press conference, heard about the walkout, knew exactly what we stood for. Every resume came with a note about wanting to work somewhere that valued people over profits. Priya's parents had visited last week from Mumbai, performing a traditional blessing ceremony in our conference room. Her mother had touched my shoulder and said, "You gave my daughter purpose beyond a paycheck. That's worth more than any valuation." I was reviewing contracts when the door opened. Taylor stood there looking like a ghost of the man I'd married. He'd lost weight but not in a healthy way. More like grief had been eating him from the inside. In his hand were papers I recognized immediately. Divorce documents. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. We went to the break room, the nice one with actual chairs and a coffee machine that worked. He sat across from me, the papers between us like a border we were about to formally recognize. "I've been in therapy," he said without preamble. "Twice a week for 4 months. Learning about family dynamics, enmeshment, enabling. Terms I didn't even know existed when we got married." "That's good, Taylor. I should have stood up for you." The words rushed out like they'd been building pressure. "That Tuesday when Dad humiliated you, I should have been in that boardroom defending you. Oh, I should have walked out with you. Instead, I came home and asked you to fix his mess. I chose comfort over courage, familiarity over what was right." He pushed the papers toward me. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I know that ship has sailed. I wanted you to know that I understand now. What I lost. What I threw away because I couldn't stand up to my father." "Are you still at Vertex?" I asked. He laughed, but it was hollow. "Nobody's at Vertex. It got absorbed by Stratton Corp last month. They kept the patents and fired everyone else. Dad's reputation made sure nobody would buy it intact." We signed the papers in relative silence, just the scratch of pens and the hum of the coffee machine. In this same room where my team had planned Phoenix Digital's future, I was signing away the past. Taylor stood to leave, then turned back. "I hope you find someone who sees your worth immediately," he said. "Not after it's too late. Not after they've already lost you. Someone who stands up for you on Tuesday, not apologizes for it 6 months later." After he left, I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of ending a marriage that had probably been over long before Nicholas gave me those 5 minutes. But there was peace in it too. Clean endings made room for better beginnings. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just closing chapters." I stood, shaking off the melancholy. "What's up?" "Thought you should see this." She showed me her phone. Nicholas's LinkedIn profile, updated that morning. Independent business consultant, working from an address I recognized as a strip mall on the outskirts of town. His latest post was about leadership through adversity and the importance of decisive action. 3 likes. I clicked on them. 2 were clearly bot accounts and 1 was from someone trying to sell him marketing services. "That's sad," I said. "That's consequences," Margaret corrected. "He works alone from a rented office above a tax preparation service. No clients, no prospects, no future in tech. His reputation is so toxic that even desperate startups won't touch him. I thought about the Nicholas who'd stood at the head of his mahogany table, emperor of his domain, counting down my professional execution. Now he had infinite time and nothing to fill it with. No employees to terrorize, no board to impress, no family to come home to. Just an empty office and LinkedIn posts that nobody read. Do you feel bad for him? Margaret asked. No, I said honestly. I feel nothing. He's just a cautionary tale now. A footnote in Phoenix Digital's origin story. That afternoon we held our weekly all-hands meeting. Not in a sterile boardroom with people checking their phones, but in our open workspace with everyone genuinely engaged. The Morrison twins presented their new framework. Sarah outlined the client growth trajectory. Gerald, yes, he was our official chief morale officer now, announced Friday's team lunch. Looking at these 40 people who'd chosen to build something with us, I thought about those 5 minutes. How they'd seemed like an ending but were actually a beginning. Nicholas had given me 5 minutes to pack up my professional life. In return, I'd gained a real family, a company built on respect, and the knowledge that when you refuse to accept humiliation, you often find dignity waiting on the other side. Hey, Priya said, appearing beside me. Catherine Walsh just called. Bloomberg wants to do a feature on us. The company that rose from a 5-minute firing. I smiled. Tell them yes. But make sure they know, we're not the story of a firing. We're the story of what happens when good people refuse to let small people make them smaller. The warehouse hummed with productive energy. Somewhere across town, Nicholas sat in his strip mall office, probably refreshing his LinkedIn to see if anyone had liked his latest post about resilience. The difference between us wasn't that I'd won and he'd lost. It was that I'd learned 5 minutes could build an empire, while he was still trying to understand how 5 minutes had destroyed one. If this story of corporate karma had you rooting for justice, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when 22 employees silently stood up and followed her out, turning a humiliation into a revolution. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.